Welcome to another episode of VNture podcast, your weekly source of visual novel goodness. I am Amar, and together with Tauros, we shall venture into another discussion about VNs. It's time to face our opposition head-on. We are going to handle rivals today. Those pesky and sometimes lovable characters that stand in the protagonist's way. Tell me, Tauros, what exactly makes a rival?
Hello, everyone. And yes, this episode is going to be about rivals and also another literary term called foils. A foil, in a literary sense, is a character who contrasts with another character in order to better highlight or differentiate certain qualities of the characters. A classic example of this would be like two brothers, one who's hot-headed and energetic, and the other one who's all calm and gentle. And the fact that you see them together, it highlights their behaviors, their actions, their personalities in a way that wouldn't shine as brightly if they were by themselves.
So by proxy, because this one behaves like this, the other person's quirks are that more amplified.
Yes. The foil originates from, I think, a jewelry term, where you would have your jewel, like a diamond or whatever, then you'd have a foil backing behind it to amplify its brightness.
Oh.
So in that sense, it really heightens a character more so than they would just existing in a vacuum.
Interesting. Okay.
Now, on the other hand, that doesn't quite go hand in hand with the whole point of a rival. And rivals are really interesting because the obvious one is when you have the rival as an antagonist, the big, bad, evil guy who the protagonist is fighting against the whole story.
Yeah.
But sometimes, I feel...
Yeah. It's like singular, alpha and omega, the journey and the destination. This is the person you need to overthrow.
They are set up as the big villain for the hero to overcome, right from the start all the way to the end. But on the other hand, you also get the kind of friendly rivals, like maybe the protagonist has that questionable best friend who's always pushing each other to the limits.
Yeah, true.
Or other times you have a rival who's kind of sort of on the evil side of things, but there's plenty of room for character development and who knows where things go in the future. So I feel like there's a lot of room for rivals and a lot of flexibility too,
Yeah, and if you think about it, there could also be rivals as a gauntlet of them. So maybe a monster of the week. But for example, of a title I read, it was Gachtun of the Golden Lightning. And the title itself was divided in chapters, each of them dedicated to a specific rival for that episode. Yeah, and
exactly.
The character had to overcome each and every one of them to advance. To contrast that, for another title that was in similar vein of Supernatural, it was Trample of Shatten. They feature a nemesis, pretty much the Shatten that was your rival across the entire title. And yeah, those exemplify two different things. Sometimes it could be a single rival, recurring one to oppose in your way, or maybe it's a gauntlet of them.
Exactly. Kind of like a monster of the week sort of thing.
Yeah. Oddly enough, I remember also an interesting, this is a category I just wrote, a rival in gameplay. And it kind of makes sense in Baldur's Gate. They established your group in which you partook in. You had your rivals that kept training with you recurringly throughout the entire game. Those were your rivals, and the deeper you went in the game, the harder it was to keep up. Yeah, you had to keep up with them.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Another aspect of that is maybe rivals in ideologies, because they represent countries bound by dogmas. This is probably exemplified mostly in the title I read, Venus Blood Gaia. You had factions that based off technocracy and innovation, and the other says, no, it's about evolution. And another is, no, it's about religious dogma. Those are all rivalries in ideologies.
I mean, yeah. I do, hesitate calling just any antagonist a rival, because I also get the impression that a rival is somewhat personal to the main character, It's someone who has some history and has the build up.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I want to talk about my first example here. I thought of Killer Queen. Killer Queen is a pretty indie amateur release at the time. Since then, it's had plenty of re-releases and sequels and updates, but I'm just talking about the original one, in which several people are kidnapped. They are thrown into a huge underground structure, and they're basically made to fight a battle royale for their survival. If everyone else is gunning for each other's lives, and it's up to the main character to make whatever fragile alliances he can and survive this nightmare. It's a pretty interesting, battle royale setup, because it also introduces a few cool concepts like individualized goals that you have to hide from other people. And then it also has a neat PDA system, but that's not the important part. What I want to talk about, though, is the whole point of them being rivals, is that in a battle royale setting, one character will often see, the other cast members, because there's only about a dozen of them, and they're all locked together. And so all the characters get pretty familiar with each other, not just on a personal level at the beginning when they talked to each other and got to know each other, but it's also just the repeated points of contact. As they're going through the structure and exploring and trying to achieve their goals, they run into each other, and then there's gunfire, and then there's fighting against each other as they're trying to get the jump. And so, as the story develops, the main character really develops these sorts of rivalries with some of the other contestants there. And it's these repeated encounters that, in my opinion, make these, small fry enemies more personal.
Because based upon the previous encounters, you can grow into what to expect next time and how to outwit them next time, right?
Yes. And of course, part of what I like too is that, going back to the whole Monster of the Week thing, is that you have these pretty, straightforward characters as the bad guys. You got someone who's like an unhinged teenager who's living out his violent fantasies. And so when he dominates, the story arc for the first few hours, and then finally that gets resolved, and then there's someone else who steps up to the plate to be their primary rival for the next few hours, So all in all, I think, when you have a smaller cast and when you have these repeated encounters, it feels a lot more personal.
This is an example in a battle royale that they have to outwit each other in order to survive. Like, that's the incentive.
Mm-hmm. So it does give some more depth to the characters too, because then you start seeing what they're capable of. It's like, oh, things are getting scary.
Yeah, when things get desperate, now you see their true character.
Mm-hmm.
Damn, that's actually a very interesting angle, because it's not like they stand in a position for a grander goal behind. No, they are the purpose. You need to overcome them to survive.
Exactly. Like you were mentioning some of the earlier examples about having ideological differences. And there's not really that much of that when it's down to the nitty-gritty survival, in Killer Queen.
Yeah.
It's a very different form.
Exactly. It's more direct. It's your them.
Mm-hmm. Killer Queen, on another note, it was also a great example of a foil between two characters. Because Killer Queen has a little bit of a unique structure where it has one route that is fully linear, and when you complete it, it unlocks, episode 2, which is that it has the same beginning, the main character waking up in his cell after he's been kidnapped, but when he opens his door, he first meets a different character. And that one small difference leads to a whole bunch of ripple effects throughout the rest of the story, and things play out differently, and then, things go in a completely different direction, and it's a totally new story. And what really makes it different is that in the first episode, I guess you can say, he meets a girl named Sakumi. I hope I'm saying these character names right. I don't know. And she's a typical heroine. She's, good-natured, and she's innocent, and she's, the damsel in distress in this whole dangerous environment. And a lot of the route of episode 1 centers around her and the main character's bond.
Okay.
However, in episode 2, he first meets a different girl named Yuki. And she is once again an innocent, helpless girl stuck in this battle royale. And he allies with her, and he's trying to protect her and do what's best for everyone with as little bloodshed while being a good person. All of that basic stuff. But without going too much into spoilers, she is a different person than Sakumi was in episode 1.
Okay.
And when you consider that this entire visual novel is playing out in a different direction because the main character met a different girl at the beginning, those differences between the two heroines become all the more striking. You kind of have this entire story playing out to see just how the differences between them lead to such a crazy different series of events. It really highlights those aspects of each of them.
So the aspect of a foil is between two characters that you haven't met together, but rather across two different episodes you compare. Is that correct?
In fact, I don't believe in either of the, episode 1 or episode 2 that Sakumi or Yuki even interact with each other. But just based off their roles in the story and comparing the two of them and their characters, they extremely highlight each other's qualities, and it really hammers home the severity of how each of them affected the story in their episodes.
Damn, okay.
In a vacuum, Yuki's character wouldn't have hit as hard without the comparison to Sakumi. That's what I think.
I see.
Sakumi. And so that's one basic way in how a foil is effective. You have two characters who don't even share any screen time, and yet the differences and the comparisons between them are magnitudes emphasized.
Just because they got a swapped role in the story between those two episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I see. That's a cool example.
Yeah, so that was the first, neat example I thought of for this episode. But, considering some of the stuff you've read, MR, I'm sure you have way more grand conflicts involving rivals, huh?
Yeah, I mean, the title I prepare right now to talk about is Muramasa, Full Metal Demon Muramasa, because I think it has all those categories. Very early on, you start the story of the Muramasa by they like that quote that this is not a story about heroes. So it's kind of gritty, it's very edgy. Okay, and you have a grand enemy to hunt down. That's your nemesis, the be all end all, the grand calamity that you're going to chase the entire game. And throughout the chapters, you get acquainted with some characters. You have the very quick. And ultimately, chapter by chapter, you beat some rivals of the week. So again, this game incorporates a lot of those characteristics from rivals. But I felt throughout the game, something is not right. And again, not going much into details, but I felt like there's trying constantly to misdirect me. And this is why whenever I talked about Muramasa, I said, yeah, it was easy to figure out some of the twists, but other twists just caught me off guard. So yeah, they did a misdirection for the longest time really well. Because what they keep showing is rivals, right? But then between those rivals, so you have, let's say, 8 chapters, right? So each chapter is focused on a different rival you have to overcome and progress. And throughout those chapters, there's a foil in them. There's a very erratic character that stands in opposition to protagonist, who is very composed, very emotionless in a lot of places, right? And that foil is a very much a background character, a coward, someone who doesn't engage, right? And still, remember, you have your mission, big nemesis, go, right? That guides your movement. But slowly and surely, in all those chapters, oddly enough, that foil is involved in, somewhere in the background, lurking. And I'm like, even some of those routes and endings, you can antagonize the characters that you were acquainted with, and they become your rivals. So, a very interesting twist that maybe, just maybe, those that you are with in the party might become your rival because you are so detached in a lot of ways from emotion. But still, in the background, there's one more. There's one more foil. And it's such a cool rivalry in a story that likes to say, oh, there's superpowers, there's mecha, there's organizations, there's military force. There's people with very much, how can I say it? Because not to obviously say too much. With supernatural talents, maybe supernatural powers. And ultimately, what it boils down, after all is done, after your journey is concluded, that the true foil is humanity, is someone who is very mundane, regardless of how strong and how powerful the main character grew. The biggest rival of them all was someone very weak. And it was such a great message. Oh my god, it was... I loved it.
Interesting.
Again, I'd rather not spoil too much of it.
Of course.
But the way they pull the rug under you and misdirect you all the time, there's so many characters to keep track of. Especially head-on. Your rivals, non-stop. Some of them are too powerful for you, some you dispatch quite easily. But still, they still have one final message, regardless of how the story evolves. And you know, the typical Japanese story tends to be you fight regular people, then it escalates, you fight maybe countries, maybe organizations, then it escalates, you fight nations, then you fight gods. You know the dream, right? Yeah.
The classic JRPG
Exactly.
story.
But the final true confrontation is the most humane thing ever. Two regular people clashing wills. And that was such amazing finale. Oh, I loved it. And that rival is, or foil, I don't even know. I think it was a foil that evolved into your rival.
You can have both.
Yeah, I know. But that person wasn't portrayed as that for the majority of the time. But ultimately, it evolves into one. And that was such a great execution. I loved it.
I was going to say, generally, I'm not a fan of stories that pull surprise reveals at the end of who the real mastermind behind the scenes is. Because to me, those always have felt like, kind of, for lack of a better term, ass pulls. When you get to the end and you're like, we need a twist. So we're just going to pull a character's name out of a hat and say, oh, they're the real big villain all along. But in stories when it's very deliberately set up, or even in some cases mysteries, for example, getting that surprise ending, that big twist when someone reveals all their carefully laid plans for the end, and they finally, take the cover off at the end. Those kinds of stories and reveals and rivals have always stood out strongest. Because it's great. And I'm assuming, I haven't read Muramasa, and, so without spoiling anything, but I'm assuming, Muramasa is the good kind, where it really pulls off that whole, the themes, the rivalry, the characterization.
Yeah.
It really nails the ending, right?
If I were to give it letters, right? What Muramasa does is establish a plot A. That is the most important plot. Plot A. Main plot.
Mm-hmm.
And it sometimes incorporates plot B. A subplot. Or a somewhat related, somewhat correlated to A, but also important. But underlying all of that, and after you complete all the plot A, all plot B, you did not realize there's a plot C. That is personal. It is not grand. Everything that was grand was solved. But something very human, something very grounded, something very mundane is underneath all of that. That your protagonist cares about. It's not a asshole like, oh no, it was me all along. No. It was something new that was ever present, but made apparent of its threats by the last couple of hours of reading, let's say. Not to get into much detail, but it is not definitely an asshole of, and it was actually me, and then he unveils a mask or something, and that's stupid.
Right.
No.
Okay. Because, I've heard a lot of praise for Muramasa and its characters. So it's good to hear some of the applications of it.
Yeah, they definitely...
Especially from a fan who really loved it. That's always fun.
Again, I have to say, as much as some of the plots were easily solvable, and I guess, maybe easy is misnomer, but I could deduce the conclusion of, more or less sometimes I was disappointed. The big reveals, almost all of them surprised me, and heck yeah, that was amazing. So Tauros,
note if you're ready to Yes.
So Tauros, what are your more examples of those rivalries?
Well, to go in a very different direction, we are going to the high schools of Japan with an example of Majikoi, a very comedic title with a massive cast. And like I said, this is set in a high school setting. However, the characters are just bursting with life. They all have wildly different personalities, and they're all a little eccentric in their own ways. And they all bounce off each other so well in some fantastic writing, plot development, and character growth. All that good stuff. But early on in the common route, there was one interaction that really stuck with me for much of the visual novel. I'll start by describing the main character, because the main character is not much of a blank slate. He's his own, high school boy with a developed personality and all of that.
Okay.
His name's Yamato. He relies on his brains in a school that very much prioritizes martial arts training and strength. And so when you have a lot of characters who, very much pride themselves on their physical prowess, he prefers to make plans and to set up the chessboard so that he is in a winning position from the start. He's a very smart character. He's also plenty underhanded. He's willing to get his hands dirty through some less than moral means if it means winning and protecting his friends. And so that's a pretty cool character. That's pretty cool for him. Early on in the common room, the focus is on, the rest of the cast and the heroine, so he doesn't get much of a chance to show off. However, early on, he's hanging out on the roof, and he starts up a little conflict with another character who's in a different class. He's part of class 2S, who has a heated rivalry with Yamato's class.
Okay.
His name is Toma. And Toma is very similar to the main character. He is also highly intelligent. He also very much enjoys strategizing his plans ahead of time, and he's also willing to get his hands dirty. They're both on the rooftop overlooking the sports field, and their wager is to just pick a person lining up for a race that they see way down below and just take a bet on who will win. On the face of it, it sounds like it's just leaving a lot to luck. How it's just a whimsical, oh, I guess that guy will win, and so on. But as, we get to see main character's inner thoughts, we get to see how the main character actually set things up ahead of time. How he talked to some of the students who was on the sports field and said, hey, if I give you a signal, you're going to throw the race.
Okay, so something like an insider knowledge. Okay.
Oh, yes. He has plenty of knowledge. This is not just a whimsical, oh, I'll just pick that guy because he looks fast. He did a lot of groundwork because he anticipated running into Toma on the roof and then led the situation to go straight into his carefully made plans. Yes, very much. And so we get to see the main character's thoughts about it. And as Toma also makes his own suggestions and his own plays, we get to see, main character thoughts running through his head of how Toma also must have set things up beforehand and how he's playing off the situation, and Yamato has to now anticipate what's going on and tweak it again into his favor.
Okay, so it's a rival in terms of battle of wits.
Yes, it's very much a battle of wits for a situation that's really not all important in the grand scheme of things, but they're both treating it as very important, and both of them want to come out ahead, obviously, simply as a matter of pride. And again, this isn't really a big deal. It's just one day in the common route life. There's plenty of other characters, and this is just one small scene. But as everything develops, and as you see them play off each other, and you see how evenly matched they are, it really hammers home how similar the two of them are. Like I said, you have a huge cast, and they're all crazy eccentric in their own ways. Like, no two characters are the same. And yet you have this guy who's in the advanced gifted class, and you have our main character who's kind of in the class for losers and dweebs.
Oh my god, yeah.
And yet both of them go into a huge battle of wits where they both try to anticipate each other, play it off, and come out ahead. And so it really hammers home just how much of a different field they're both playing on and how advanced they are. And specifically, the one difference between them. In that our main character says he's happy to live his normal daily life, just hanging out with his friends and protecting the people who he cares about. And Toma, on the other hand, is more focused on success. He's going to one day become a doctor and probably take over his father's directorship of the hospital. He's definitely looking forward to bigger and better things in life.
Okay, so you have a rival, or maybe even a foil at that time.
Yes, definitely a foil. There's really not much else to them aside to really make this a rivalry in my perspective. So, like I said, this is just one quick scene, and really the important part is just establishes their characters.
Yeah, so a reflection of some sort that is warped by ambition.
Absolutely. There's not much stakes to it. It's just a matter of really seeing the inner workings of both of their minds. And we also get to see that real what if, where if, our main character happened to be the kind of personality where he'd really want to drive himself to personal success. And what would happen if you had the other guy, Toma, if, he perhaps took it a little bit easier in life.
Okay, because that's true. They both mirror each other's alternative takes on their path. One, if the main protagonist would have more ambition, the other, if he mellowed out, right?
So you have these two very similar characters, and it enhances the things that they're both have in common. They're both geniuses. They're both a little bit shifty. They both care about their friends. But on the other hand, just the one thing that sets them apart, the one thing that put their lives on different paths, you could say, it makes it shine all the brighter.
Dang.
So I always think those two characters are a good example for describing what a foil is.
True. That's a cool example.
Mm-hmm. Both of them very much accentuate each other.
Huh. Okay.
It's all the funnier when, this little event ends and then they both go back to their normal high school life and everyone's yucking it up in the classroom. Just being goofballs.
Oh, yeah.
Magikoi is still a comedy at heart, and there's so many funny moments. I love it so much.
Yeah, I can imagine. There is a reason why you keep bringing it on and on again, right?
Oh, man, I love all the characters.
Too much your energy, both as a representation of foils and a title I bring on and on and on again. I brought Evenicle, okay?
Nice.
How can I describe this game? It's a story that portrays doing the best in a very warped environment. And what I mean by that? A story set in a world bound by divine law that either dehumanizes you for any sin or retains you as a human as long as you adhere to the grand rules. And you look at the story from the perspective of Aster. And as a normal high school boy, that is a normal Japanese plot. He wants to marry both of his sisters, but he can't. In this world, you can only marry one person. What a guy to do. And it just so happened that there is a loophole. If you are a knight, a virtuous knight in defense of humanity, your pool of allowed wives increases by the rank. So if you get a normal rank knight, you get 2 wives. If you advance further, you can get 3 wives, etc. That's the story. And very early on in that story, you meet a reflection of sorts. And there is a guy called Yarase. He resembles a typical JRPG protagonist. He even is based around Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy, with a spiky hair and a large sword. And he even, funny enough, approaches all the romanceable heroines. So he's in a way rival in love. But he doesn't really behave like a typical hero should, because he's very opportunistic in his approach of ranking up in the order. Whereas Aster, the protagonist, is very pragmatic, straightforward, and a very good boy. I mean, when Yarase is the opportunistic kind. And this is pretty much established as a plot B of sorts. The increase, their own Yarase and Aster's encounters in every single zone and territory throughout the world. Continuous spats of ideology and their clashing how one should handle the situation. This is like plot B. Because plot A has been quickly established that there is a group, a gauntlet of enemies, you could say, that each of them try to ruin a peaceful solution to this status quo of divine law in every territory. So they try to disrupt each and every territory. So Aster's group quickly forms as probably the best example. It would be they kind of act like a Scooby-Doo gang that solves mysteries in all the territories.
A Scooby-Doo gang.
Yeah, because there's something weird going on, and they need to go to the bottom of it every single time.
Nice.
Yeah, and throughout those mystery solve, solving stories in each of the territory, he keeps getting in touch with that other hero who, again, takes advantage of situation instead of combating it.
The kind of guy who's more focused on the results than Aster is about the process, about being a good person.
Exactly.
Aha.
And that culminates later on in the story when he directly opposes Aster. He says, okay, you kept running around the territories and ruining all the fun that were to be had. That stops now. And that was interesting. No one really talks about that character because it's very minor part of the story, but I feel like he exemplifies what if our protagonist was also that, I wouldn't say greedy, but that unconcerned with means to an end.
Exactly. Because, in the sense, they're both very similar. They're both, self-idolized heroes going through the land. They're both doing good. They're both, hitting on all the same girls.
Yes.
But in a sense, it's just the one difference between them is their approach in life of whether you be more, materialistic or if you focus more on the inner morals of being good, doing things just for the sake of helping others.
I would say the biggest differentiator between them is Aster is selfless and the Yarasa is self-centered. That's the biggest difference.
Ah, nice.
And everything stems from that.
Exactly. And by their interactions, it really puts into perspective how different they are because of that one difference. Even though they're similar in so many things, because one is selfless and the other is self-centered, it leads to completely different paths in life.
Yeah, and funny enough, with all those romanceable characters, etc., being selfless might actually not always be better. Because there is an example of that, when Aster meets a tsundere girl, and as a tsundere says, oh, you're the worst, etc., and Aster takes it to heart, and, okay, fine, and he just leaves.
He gets sad.
And he leaves. And nothing developed because of that. So because he
Poor
internalized everything is okay, I'm so the worst. Okay, I'll leave you alone. And that's a great example. Like, obviously in VNs, they'll portray good guys that will win over those heroines. But sometimes being too good will yield worse results. That was really cool of them to show.
That's awesome. I'm super interested to play Evanico one day and see this firsthand.
Yeah. And that was very unique example of a plot B rival that very few people talk about, but I feel like that rival deserves more credit because it shows by proxy how much more self-control and selflessness Aster has.
And on that note, I think that's a good things to end on. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you all enjoyed. I definitely got to hear a lot about MR's titles and get a lot more appreciation for some of its finer details and characters. So thanks for talking about that, MR.
I was extra careful to never spoil anything.
Oh geez, you're breaking up, dude.
Sorry, I was extra careful to not spoil anything.
Oh, it's bad. I'm sorry. Okay, we might have to cut things off here, everyone. I'm sorry about that, and we'll get that figured out. But thank you, everyone, and until next week, venture out.